As Al-Qaeda has evolved, it has created an online architecture which it hoped would allow it to really control its strategic communications to a more and more geographically dispersed audience. Now, this audience really started off as geographically dispersed if you consider Al-Qaeda's birth at the end of the anti-Soviet jihad and the fact that many of the individuals to which they were networked repatriated to countries and regions all over the world. So Al-Qaeda always had a global audience to try to reach out to, but they still had training camps that they were able to use to indoctrinate individuals up until the loss of those camps following the U.S. occupation of Afghanistan after September 11th. And when they lost those training camps, as Abu Musab al-Suri famously said, Al-Qaeda had to bring the camps to the people instead of the people to the camps. And so they created this preference or this skill set in terms of generating online propaganda. As-Sahab Media is Al-Qaeda's media organization. They're the only group that has direct access to Al-Qaeda Corps' senior leadership. This reliance on online communications architecture became even more pronounced after Al-Qaeda Corps lost control of the propaganda output of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Specifically, Zarqawi, the head of Al-Qaeda in Iraq at the time, had found a young web-savvy hacker named Yunus Tsuli who was able to steal server space and upload videos from Al-Qaeda in Iraq directly, circumnavigating Al-Qaeda Corps' editorial control of that output. And the kinds of videos that they were fond of posting were things like decapitation videos in which Sunni members of Al-Qaeda in Iraq were decapitating Shia Iraqi civilians. This, of course, was very detrimental to Al-Qaeda Corps' narrative that Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Al-Qaeda, therefore, were in Iraq in order to protect Muslims against U.S. occupation. So while they were trying to play on the classical or defensive jihadist narrative, you had an Al-Qaeda branded organization conducting this Muslim-on-Muslim violence and going around Al-Qaeda's control in doing so. And so the landscape of online jihadism that evolved is really a function of those two things: Al-Qaeda's need to communicate to a geographically dispersed audience, and then their attempt to try to control that messaging strategy. What they did was they worked through two media distribution nodes, Al-Fajr and the Global Islamic Media Front. These were media distribution nodes that were based on trusted relationships. So members of As-Sahab would send video or statements from Al-Qaeda Corps' leadership directly to trusted members of these two media distribution nodes. They, in turn, had trusted partners who worked as the administrators of password-protected web forums. So these were hard-to-get-into online discussion forums in which members were vetted before they were accepted. Once you were on these online web forums, you had access to Al-Qaeda Corps' primary source propaganda through this trusted network. Those web forums were very, very fluid. They would sort of rise or decline in popularity. The intelligence community would shut one down or try to sort of frustrate the waters. Sometimes it would be revealed that there were spies on these, meaning members of the intelligence community on these networks. So it was a very fluid place. But it gave Al-Qaeda Corps a way to speak to a community, a cadre of followers quite directly. Over time, two things happened. Other terrorist organizations recognized the value of this, that terrorism, again, is propaganda by the deed, but ultimately it's propaganda, and it's important to be able to tell your story. And so they also sort of got in on the game and would create propaganda, disseminate it through these two media distribution nodes to the same or to the revolving numbers of web forums that existed. Another thing that happened over time was that you had members of these web forums create their own brand, their own popularity, and therefore their own influence on the jihadist thought community. And so here I've highlighted an independent blog of Abu Dujana al-Khorasani. This individual was a Jordanian doctor who wrote really explicitly violent posts on jihadi web forums, became very popular, gained his own celebrity, so to speak, on these web forums, and then went on to establish his own blog. And just to highlight the point that this online world is not really outside of the real world, right? These are real people behind real computers, but they go on to affect events in the real world just the same. Abu Rajan al-Khorasani, as his pen name indicates, wanted to go to Al-Khorasan, or the sort of the Afghanistan-Pakistan area, and sort of put down the keyboard and pick up the Kalashnikov, so to speak. He was responsible ultimately for the suicide bombing attack at Forward Operating Base Chapman, which killed multiple CIA operatives and several Jordanians as well. He had convinced the Jordanian intelligence apparatus that because of his online celebrity, he would be able to get them access to Al-Qaeda core, to Ayman al-Zawahiri, for example. And they rolled the dice, trusted him, and he eventually proved himself to be a double agent. Right? And so here's an individual who used his online celebrity as a mobilization network and eventually as a way to conduct a very devastating attack against, in this case, Western and coalition forces. You also have individuals like Abu Muhammad al-Maqdisi, who predate this newer online architecture. Al-Maqdisi maintains a more static library of ideological and strategic texts known as Al-Tawhid. And this library is a very important place for individuals to go to get legitimate jihadist material. But over time, Abu Muhammad al-Maqdisi came to really disagree with aspects of Al-Qaeda's operations, strategy, tactics, specifically the idea of takfir, for example. And so what happens when you add all of this together, the multiple organizations, the multiple ideologues turn operators, you get a really highly diversified thought community in which an individual seeking to find some sort of inspiration is no longer just going to find it from Al-Qaeda core, but they might find any one of these flavors of violent extremism attractive to them, and therefore really take on a violent trajectory that a group like Al-Qaeda core would not necessarily approve of, and of course that goes in other directions. There's a lot of debate that goes on within this community now in terms of things like tactics and strategy and ideology. And that gets even more diversified. The thought environment gets even more diversified as social media gains prevalence, and individuals are now downloading or generating their own propaganda, further clouding the landscape, the thought community landscape here online. And this highly differentiation of violent ideology online really has had a few effects. It's made global jihadism less elitist, less inherently fundamentalist, and less Al-Qaeda-centric. And this has really been mirrored by the evolution of global jihadism in again, the quote-unquote real world, which we'll now discuss.